Hi guys, welcome to the channel. I wanted to talk a little bit about fear of sadness and depression a little bit and how that comes into play with different OCD themes, or this could be your OCD theme itself as well. We've never called it sadness OCD, but I mean, if we really want to call it something, we can. But also, really not important to give it a label. And we get into the cycle of trying to constantly avoid sad feelings, and I was the king of that. So before I go on, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let us know what you think. Um, I want to first of all talk about how for me this was probably like the absolute worst thing that I thought I would feel, because I thought if I let myself feel sad, it'll grow and snowball into something bigger and uglier, and I will never be able to feel happy again. So I'll have a sad life for the rest of my life, right? So even the slightest amount of sadness felt like the biggest catastrophe, because it was like, oh, there's a slight glimmer of, not a glimmer, I think glimmer is kind of like a positive word. If there's like a slight presence of sadness or any negative emotion I'm feeling, it was like, okay, let's try to fix it. And so, one of the most common compulsions that comes with fear of feeling sad or depressed is that internal cycle of analysis of your feelings. Why am I feeling this? Am I feeling this? Am I feeling it more? Am I feeling it less? Has it gone now? Is it more now? Does this thing worsen this feeling? Does that thing make it better? And so we're constantly checking our internal levels of negative emotions, sadness, depression, and almost we get this kind of sensation of digging in deep, of uncovering, like, is it there hidden below? Because what we also fear is that even when we're feeling happy, we are afraid that behind all those layers of perhaps happiness and joy, deep down there's some layer of depression lingering in the background. So it almost feels like we have to dig through the happiness to get to the core layer of depression and somehow fix it and solve it. So that internal emotional fixing that we're doing is going to be a very constant 24/7 cycle if you're doing that. And also it'll happen quite automatically as well, because that's what your brain has now, that's the habit that your brain has developed, right? Because it's operating from a very strong place of fear. And so it will automatically, even when you're going about your day, it will automatically try to scan for any amount of sadness in the background and try to be like, okay, as soon as I detect it, I will alert Momin about some presence of sadness, so that later in the day, when Momin is done with his day, later at night or in the evening, he can sit down and try to figure out what's going on. So again, that's what was happening with me. So I was really stuck in this internal cycle of constant analysis, trying to push away any negative emotions that were coming away. And I was avoiding anything that would make me even remotely low as well. Not even like really sad or depressed. I was even avoiding things that would make me feel the slightest amount of, you know, even disappointment, because disappointment is also a kind of sadness. Any kind of something that would really bring my mood, a bit low like this. So I would want to avoid any of those things. So some of the things I really want to talk about, some compulsions I want to talk about, are some things like avoiding the news, because the news has a lot of like sad things going on, right? There's a lot of bad, sad things going on in the world, and we feel like it's going to be way too much for us to handle. So we completely avoid the news. And again, there's a balance between indulging in way too much news and then trying to avoid it like a virus, right? And so we try to stay away from news channels, news pages, and we also don't want to be part of any conversations that are discussing any sad, bad news around the world. So reading some of that stuff is going to be a good, exposure. Then also avoiding sad movies or TV shows or documentaries. So I think some of the movies that I avoided watching was Sophie's Choice, even though I've already seen it and I really like it, and I've wanted to watch it. but I would not watch it because I'd be like, no, I've already seen it once and it's too depressing and sad. I don't want to watch it again. So, or then so what I would do is another compulsive thing is going through the synopsis of each movie or TV show to see is it too heavy or depressing. So, shows like Black Mirror, Mr. Robot, um, yeah, and any Handmaid's Tale, although that's not something that was on my list, but anyway, but because it felt too heavy and intense, I would just not go into it. Or same for any documentaries, because usually the good documentaries on like Netflix and other streaming platforms are usually about true crime and murder cases and things like that. So I would constantly stay away from those things because it would feel like a lot to deal with. Again, it ties into this fear cycle of if I go towards this, it would be too overwhelming, and I would never be able to get out of this overwhelming anxiety or sadness. Or even if I do, it'll take me a very long time to unwind from this really sad, intense story. So that's where the fear cycle also ties very intrinsically to fear of sadness or fear of depression. So then there's also, on the flip side, there's the compulsion of obsessively watching feel good things. So this is what I would at times do as well. At the end of the day, I would put on something feel good or something I have already seen, right? That I know that I don't have to put too much, brain power into understanding because I already know what's happening. So watching feel good things, and the most common, I would say, TV show for a lot of people is Friends or The Office or Parks and Recreation, all these kinds of sitcoms and comedy shows or comedy movies, right, that you really, really love. So trying to watch those, especially at the end of the day to unwind, is compulsive too. So that the next day you wake up with a fresh mind and you don't wake up with sadness on your mind. That's a very common compulsion when trying to avoid negative feelings. I've also done a video on fear compulsions and fear of being overwhelmed, and there are a lot of things in that video that tie in with this. So do watch that if you have the time and willingness as well. Then doing activities that are not very exhausting. Again, the fear thing, because for people who have a fear of sadness and a fear of being depressed, they often, in their mind, it is often linked to feeling exhausted and feeling tired. So, and this was for me as well, because I thought if I do something that's way too tiring, somehow it would be too much for my nerves to handle, and therefore the emotion that my nerves will resort to is sadness. And so I would want to avoid anything that would make me feel tired and exhausted. And then, I mean, ironically, anxiety fatigue was one thing that I was constantly experiencing as well. This also ties in with other themes like ROCD, harm OCD, and actually any theme that you have, it ties in very well with that, because if you have a fear of breaking up with your partner, for example, there is that fear of I will feel sad forever. Or if you have harm OCD and you feel like you will harm your loved ones, it's like I will be sad forever. If you have sexual orientation OCD, you'll be like, if I am something other than what I think I am, I'll be sad forever. So if I keep noticing my sensations for the rest of time, I will be sad forever. So it very much is linked to most themes that people suffer with. So even if you, so let's say you have harm OCD and you're doing compulsions like staying away from sharp objects, knives, or movies about serial killers and things like that, at the same time, you're probably also doing things like avoiding the news and avoiding seeing where there was a, I don't know, climate disaster or something like that, because for you it is just as scary as going near a sharp object, because both of them for you feel like will lead to this intense sadness that you won't be able to deal with. So which is why sometimes it's important to widen the scope of our compulsions and where our behaviors are playing out. So it won't be just with your specific theme, but it will also be playing out in general life behaviors as well. For a lot of people, fear of sadness and depression is also very much linked to suicide OCD or self harm OCD, where you feel like you're going to do something if you feel too sad and too depressed. And that, as an extension, is often linked to fear of rejection, what other people will think of you, the legacy you leave behind, you hurting other people, and by leaving this memory of yourself with them and things like that. So obviously that's a separate topic to be broken down, but just highlighting here that fear of sadness and depression is often linked to that as well. For me, though, for example, it wasn't, because I just didn't have that theme. The only thing I was afraid of was feeling sad for the rest of my life. Living each moment feeling really sad about myself, about things I have done, and things like that. So it can be different for each person. For every person who has a fear of sadness or fear of depression, it doesn't always have to link to fear of self-harm OCD or suicide OCD. But yeah, I mean, and also what we also have to break down is our perception of sadness itself, because we are thinking of sadness as inherently the worst thing ever to happen to a human being. Whereas if we were happy all the time, life would be monotonous and monotone, and we would just take everything for granted, and life would be boring, really. And this is not just me saying some mumbo jumbo. This is genuinely what I believe, and also what a lot of philosophers and thinkers have said for like thousands of years, essentially. That if you didn't have sadness, you wouldn't have anything to contrast with happiness, right? And sadness about things also can provide us with motivation to change our circumstances, things in the relationship. It can push us to do that. And I'm not right now talking in terms of our OCD, and if you feel like, oh, there's something to be fixed, I need to do that. I'm just talking in general, like in a general philosophical sense of why sadness provides a very pivotal role in and a pivotal function in human lives, right? And so the presence of sadness is not the inherently bad thing over here. It is your perspective of it is what matters. And of course, you think that, no, I'm okay with sadness, I just don't want to feel sad forever, right? However, that's not entirely true, because the moment you start feeling even a little bit sad, you start getting really triggered and you start feeling very panicky. So that in itself tells you that you're not just afraid of long term intense sadness and depression, you're afraid of even the tiniest presence of it, which is why you want to immediately go towards and fix that. So logically, you probably understand that, yeah, I mean, sure, I mean, sadness is not like a bad thing, and sure, I can feel sad for a moment, I just don't want to feel sad forever. Logically, you probably understand that, but still, you're still approaching it with that urgency to immediately fix. You're still doing a lot of compulsions around it, which shows that the perspective and the fear is still very, very deeply entrenched in your beliefs and the behaviors that you're doing around this. So it's 100% something in terms of perspective wise that you have to work and change, because if you don't change the belief behind it, only changing the behaviors will not change your perception of what sadness is and why it isn't something that needs to be completely eradicated from human existence. Again, even if you didn't have OCD, sadness would still be a part of your life. Sadness would still come in waves, in different moments, in different phases of life. Sometimes we have a phase in life where for a year or two we feel generally sad. That can be, for example, for someone who loses a loved one, for instance. They can feel sad about that for a year or two, and it takes them quite a while to overcome that sadness or feel like they are kind of back to normal in that sense. So yeah, I mean, it's an unavoidable thing as well. It's like trying to avoid, I don't know, your skin. That's the parallel I can come up with, because you can't escape sadness. It's an inherent part of our life. So the only thing that we can do is how we approach it and how we react to it, which comes down to breaking down irrational beliefs and cutting out compulsions from trying to completely run away from it. The other important thing I want to touch on is the internal controlling of our emotions, because Emotions are not something that you can curate and control in the way you think you can. And in fact, it has the opposite effect on our emotions. So you trying to control sadness will actually make you feel more sad. You trying to control anxiety is actually going to make you feel more anxious. And what starts happening is that then we start living our life 24/7 in a cycle of trying to like avoid. And every single moment is like walking on eggshells. Is this going to make me feel sad? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling okay? Can I hold on to this happiness? So that internal cycle is constantly happening. So we also have to let go of that control we're trying to exert over our emotions and our thoughts constantly, because it would not solve the problem. And it's also important to realize that the human brain is way too complex to feel just one single emotion in one single moment. So you can be feeling quite sad about something while also feeling happy about something else. We have multiple emotions that we feel in one singular moment. So a lot of emotions are coexisting in that time. You can think about, let's say, moving away from your childhood home, for instance. So that will bring about a lot of mixed feelings. You'll be feeling quite sad about it, but at the same time, you'll be very excited to move to a new place. You'll probably be feeling really anxious, the bad kind of anxious, what if it doesn't work out, but also the good kind of anxious, like I'm kind of excited to see where it brings me. You'll be feeling the good kind of nervous and the bad kind of nervous. You'll not be feeling very confident about it, but you'll also be feeling a bit risky about things as well. Ooh, let's see what happens. There might be some anger as well involved, which is like, oh my god, my new landlord, he's so annoying and I'll have to deal with him. So there can be multiple emotions that you're feeling in one single moment. So the human brain is way too complex to try to be like, no, I just want to feel only happiness in this moment, or I only want to feel sadness, or I mean, nobody says that I want to feel sadness, but you get what I mean. Like, you can't singularly feel one single emotion by trying to control and trying to make it really happen really hard. So that's also another perspective that we need to understand, because it's unrealistic for us to expect to feel just one single emotion in one single moment. And the other perspective I want to bring over here is that our emotions are, of course, a little bit influenced by our like certain brain chemical levels and certain hormones in the body. Now, I obviously don't know like all those names and things like that, but if I try to realistically look at things, if I'm feeling really happy, there are certain hormones and chemicals in my body that are at a certain level, right? However, realistically speaking, if I live, I don't know, a total of 80 years on this earth, then in all those 80 years, in those millions of moments that my life has, my brain will not be able to sustain those levels of chemical and hormonal levels in my body at all times. It will have to come down at some point. It will have to fluctuate and change at some point. Whatever the internal systems are of the body to regulate itself and things like that, it it will change. It won't be able to do the exact same thing in every exact same moment. So I also have to get comfortable with my body in a biological sense, acting in ways that I can't control, acting in ways that I can't even see or detect. Even if you like cut, or if we cut ourselves open from the middle, we won't be able to see emotions running through our veins. We'll just be able to see blood and chemicals and fluids and things like that. So we so as far as like trying to control emotions go, you won't be able to do it because your brain can't do it. It will have to have its own motions, and we have to get comfortable with our body having its own motions as well. So I hope this video helped. I hope this brought you some new perspectives, and I'll be back with more videos soon. Have a good day. Bye.